and welcome to the Preservation Association of Lincoln Brown Bag. My name's Eileen Burkton. I'm the coordinator of these brown bags for the Preservation Association of Lincoln. And our videotaping today is sponsored by the Preservation Association of Lincoln. Our speaker today is Grant Landreth. Grant is the project coordinator for the Nebraska State Historical Society Preservation Office. And his talk today is titled Financial Incentives for Historic Preservation. Please join me in welcoming Grant.
Thanks, Eileen. I'm Grant Landreth. I've been doing this for about a little over 4 years, maybe even almost 5. It's starting to kind of bleed together. But I enjoy it nonetheless. I love looking at old buildings and meeting new people, and just everyone's a little bit different, the people in the buildings. So, there you go. But there are incentives, and we'll get to that. They do require a little bit of work, but we definitely think they're worth doing, and there's a lot of happy applicants that would agree as well with us. So with that, I will start. So there are 2 incentives. The first one is a federal tax credit in the form of 20% of a project's qualified rehabilitation expenditures. And the other one is a state incentive called the Valuation Incentive Program, and I'll get to that later. So just to kind of lay the groundwork there. So for the federal program, this is a program that's been utilized by a lot of developers. It tends to be for larger projects. But can also be for small projects as well. And you could see a lot of the results of that program in Omaha and Lincoln especially. I mean, in Lincoln in the Haymarket in the late 80s and sort of early to mid 90s, that whole area was redeveloped in good part with the historic tax credits along with some local incentives, I'm sure. And then in Omaha, a good deal of the old market and the rail and commerce district has been rehabilitated with the tax credits. So there's certainly a valuable tool. And as I find myself administering the program and being involved with projects, those projects that kind of started out in more sort of like warehousing and jobbing type buildings are starting to kind of move towards apartments. As those other properties have been developed, start moving to other types of property, other property types. So it's kind of interesting how things are evolving as preservation in Nebraska has evolved. So for the federal historic tax credit, not to bore you with a bunch of details, but just kind of give you the kind of nitty-gritty. What are the 5 biggest requirements? First one, a property must be listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and that can either be listed individually or as contributing to a historic district, or it could also be contributing to a locally landmark district that has been certified by the Secretary of the Interior. And the Haymarket Historic District is one of those districts that's a local district, but it's been certified. And the property, after the project's completed, must be used for income-producing purposes. So that means sort of rental, residential, industrial, commercial. It's definitely not a program that's for private residential use, which we'll get into with the valuation incentive program, because there was a big kind of gap, at least we felt, and the citizens of Nebraska, when they voted for the state incentive, felt that there was an incentive for people that are just doing good stuff with their houses. But this program is definitely for income-producing property. And then you have a financial requirement that you must meet the adjusted basis of the property or $5,000, whichever is greater. And just in a general roundabout way, adjusted basis is kind of complicated, but if you just think, whatever the purchase price of the property is, you subtract the value of the land, and then you have to figure in if depreciation, or if you made improvements, how that affects the basis. And all work must adhere to the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. Ultimately, all these projects are reviewed at the Park Service, the National Park Service level. It's a federal program, and sort of cooperation with the Internal Revenue Service. But our office is kind of the conduit. We're the kind of eyes and ears on the ground, helping property owners understand what the requirements are, how to move forward, get through the application process, and sort of talk with the folks at the National Park Service and make sure the communication is as clear as it can be. I get a lot of, everyone wants to know, how do I know that my project's going to meet the standards? How do I know certain work is going to meet the standards? How do I know, just, there's a lot of unknowns with this process. And the program's been around since 1976, I believe. I'm pretty sure on that. And since that time, and I should say there's 10 standards for rehabilitation, but the Park Service, over the evolution of the program, has developed a whole slew of guidance on specific treatments, like windows, if you have like a historically open space like an auditorium, what can I do with that sort of thing. I mean, they really have kind of created all this guidance because there have been questions on, how to solve some of these unknowns. So the first one is, looking to the standards. Like, how do you know? Well, there's certainly this set of guidance. But then there's this other set of guidance that the Park Service has developed that I just talked about. And then, like I said before, me. I'm here. I'm here to help. Your tax dollars pay my salary in part. The other part is federal, but I'm definitely here to help. And that goes for everyone in our office. I mean, we have other portions of our office, whether it's surveying historic properties or listing things in the National Register, or we call Federal Review or Section 106, but we're real people, and you just call us up and we'll get back to you. So definitely me and others in our office. So like I said before, the credit is 20% of your project's total qualified rehabilitation expenditures. So that definitely excludes things like site improvements, like landscaping, and it also will exclude certain things like appliances and furniture. But it's really just like things that are physically, improvements that are physically attached to the building, like lighting or structural or plumbing, that sort of thing. So definitely, it probably includes more things than it excludes. And that's sort of an IRS requirement. And just really briefly, like I said, a good deal of the projects have been larger buildings. This is a project going on. Actually, it should be completed in August or early September in Omaha. It's the Farm Credit Building. So certainly, you got a 11, 12-story building. That's a tax credit project. This was a project in Fremont. It was a power plant. So you definitely have different property types, whereas you have an office building, but you can also use the credit for a building that used to be, some sort of quasi-industrial sort of thing. And Main Street buildings, I mean, those are our bread and butter. Those are the lifeblood of Nebraska. And they're really we're seeing a lot of those demolished and people sort of not understand and not appreciate them for whatever reason. And, whether that's population shifting, I don't know. But where we can, we like to be helpful and try to improve these properties. And this was a project in Hastings. And the project on the right, or the photo on the right, is the storefront being reconstructed. As you can see on the left, kind of what had happened with the 1930s, 40s, and 60s storefront remodels. So definitely these incentives can certainly improve property to more of a historic appearance. And then residential buildings. So if you own some properties and you're renting them out to either single family or maybe some of these houses were kind of cut up during the sort of mid-century, early to mid-century, and turned into apartments or duplexes or fourplexes. So certainly if it's rental residential, you can certainly use the credits. And the Park Service last year created about 3 or 4 different sort of guides on specific building types, or more of a general way, just sort of, I guess, kind of to speak to the mom and pop, how do I do the credits? What do the credits mean? How can I use them? How do I even apply? And so one of them, and they're Main Street buildings, but there's also guidance for barns and wood frame houses. And there's one other I can't remember, but they're really helpful to for those types of projects that are kind of mom and pop, or you're just kind of on your own. You don't really have a tax attorney or an accountant, or you don't have a consultant that you've hired. You're just doing it on your own. They're really helpful, and they're online, and there's the website right there. So that's the federal programming. There's a lot more to know, and certainly my phone number was at the beginning, and it's at the end. I believe it's at the end, but give me a call, and I can answer any questions. We do a lot of site visits, so don't feel like you can't talk to me. So the state incentive, This was voted on by the citizens of Nebraska. I believe it was Amendment 1, and then it turned into LB 66, and then it was the Evaluation Incentive Program. And I started at the Historical Society in October of 2006. So pretty much I have been administering it for a few months after it started. So some requirements of the program. The property must be listed in the National Register of Historic Places to be historically significant property. It can also be property that is locally landmarked by a municipality with a preservation ordinance. So those communities right now that have that authority, definitely, Lincoln, but also Omaha, Red Cloud, North Platte, Sidney, Plattsmouth, and I believe there's one other I'm forgetting. But those are communities that, maybe there's a property that doesn't quite meet the criteria of National Register listing, but it's still, and we would tell this to property owners as well, it still really is important to the community, and then it can be landmarked locally by the community, and then the property owner can take advantage of the state incentive. Financially, to qualify you, the property owner must have 25 qualified rehabilitation expenditures that meet or exceed 25% of the property's current assessed value. And all work, just like with the federal program, all of the work must be in compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. And typically the project it needs to be completed within 2 years, although statute allows us some flexibility with that. Just to kind of clarify, the federal program is a tax credit. The state incentive is a property tax preference or a freeze. So they're two different things, and often you can do them together. Often a lot of the expenditures will kind of apply for both. The federal is a tax credit. The state incentive will freeze the property's current assessed value for a period of 8 years after the project's completed and has been approved by our office. And then after the initial 8, there are 4 years of incremental increases for a total 12-year benefit. And this has happened a couple times. The benefit's transferable with the property. So I had and actually I'm going to show it in the presentation, a property owner that wanted to essentially flip the property and make a profit, and they were able to use the incentive as kind of an added benefit to whoever was going to buy. Just one of those extra things that people could say, oh yeah, if I buy this, maybe it's a little bit more money than I wanted to spend, but it's all been improved, and I know that the property taxes are going to be this value for this amount of time. So it actually can be beneficial that way as well. And I like to just show pictures because I think there's a lot of misperceptions out there on what you have to do to meet the requirements of this program. I mean, just sort of flat out, we can say if there are existing conditions with the property that a prior owner did, maybe we would all look at it and say, wow, I can't believe they took the cornice off that Main Street building. Not this one in particular, but just in general, if you bought the building with that cornice removed, you're not required to put it back. And that applies to a lot of things. You're not penalized for a previous owner's misdeeds. With this project, and this was in Columbus, the applicant didn't do any work to the outside, which a lot of people tend to think that's really where the preservation happens. That's, it's the outside. That's what most people will see. But they spent a lot of time and money and labor on the inside. And so on the left-hand side, they, seems pretty simple, but they removed the lay-in ceiling and exposed the tin ceiling and routed new infrastructure, whether it was lighting or HVAC, to try to minimize the impact to the ceiling and let it sort of shine, and just cleaned it up. It was a little bit more intense than that, I'm sure, but just things like that can make a big difference. They also opened up the area above the storefront that was always kind of like a shelf display area, and they also had transoms. So they opened that up and used it to display their goods. And I like to show this photo because the historic hexagon tile floor was not exposed, and they removed the carpet. And you'll notice on the picture on the right, in the sort of final photo, the hex tile doesn't even line up with the existing entry, and that's okay. You know, you just do the little things that you can and try to make the building make sense, and I think we're all the better for it. So definitely is a good example, just showing you can work within the existing conditions and confines of the property that you buy or that you own. This is a project in Omaha in the Dundee neighborhood, and I like to show this one because a lot of people they'll buy a property and you'll have a corridor and it'll have all these doors, and they're like, well, we don't need all these doors. What do we do with all them? And the answer that has been sort of evolved over time with the Park Service and different projects throughout the country is just utilize the doors that you can, but the doors that just don't make any sense anymore, fix them in corridor side, just cover over them with drywall. So like when you're in the corridor, it really feels like it did historically, but when you're on the non-corridor side, you have the sort of more modern amenities like a larger kitchen and bedrooms and that sort of thing. So it's always trying to strike that balance between keeping the historic qualities of a building, but also allowing the building to, meet the demands of today. So there's creative ways to do that. This is a project in Plattsmouth, and most of the things are existing, and really the applicant just painted the facade and they left that blue structural glass that really isn't within the period of significance of the district in Plattsmouth, but again, it's an existing condition. Replaced the windows. The tin ceiling was already exposed, but just did some minor maintenance and moved some of the rusted tin ceiling around and repainted everything and just made it look really clean and trying to make the space make sense. And then in the back, it was a garage, and I just sort of wanted the applicant to try whatever he was going to do, try to keep to the character of the industrial, sort of character of that garage, not try to make it look residential or put tin ceiling up and make it look commercial like in the front of the building. But just keep that industrial character and just really, go simple with it. So, and it doesn't cost a lot, as some people might think. Even just simple, it's sort of like, I think it's like pressboard wood paneling and some, metal roofing on the ceiling can do a lot of good. This is the big aha project that I like to show. The property owners, this is in Dundee Historic District in Omaha, and they bought the property. It was covered with steel siding, and a good deal, as you can see on the photo on the right, a good deal of the brackets had been removed, and some of the other architectural details had been removed by a previous owner when they put on the steel siding. They found a historic photo, and they decided, and it's not a requirement, they went above and beyond. They decided to reconstruct the dormers to match the appearance found in the historic photo. So I think, really made the building make sense again with that sort of large roof. It sort of, what's missing? You always kind of drive by. And now with the dormers, like, oh yeah, of course that makes sense. That's what was there. And also they enlarged the back of their house for a big kitchen, but designed it in such a way where it's obvious that it's an addition. And that's another important thing to remember with either the federal program or the state program. People, sometimes there's a need to make the building larger, and when you do that, it's always trying to strike a balance between a design that's compatible with the historic character of the property, but also visually different enough that to the trained eye, like myself or my colleagues, or even maybe sometimes a layperson, they can sort of see it and be like, oh yeah, that kind of juts out there, that does something a little bit different, that's obviously an addition. That's really trying to always strike that balance between the two. And that's what this property owner was able to do, is to sort of allow the addition to kind of bump out and covered it with cedar siding, but it could have been concrete siding. But it definitely reads like an addition, but fits in with the character of the house. This is a project in Field Club in Omaha. On the outside, the applicant painted, they put in new storm windows, but left the wood windows. On the inside, the major renovation, and I think this is kind of, I find with a lot of the state program projects, people want to either put on an addition or remodel and put in a new kitchen, or both. Often the addition is tied to the kitchen. But for this applicant, they utilized square footage within the house and in a bedroom that was never really utilized that for a bedroom. It was kind of a hole, if you will. But they cut through, so you see the photo on the left and then the photo on the right. They cut through one of those walls and left some wing wall and a header, so you can still tell that, okay, this room's a dining room, but the room beyond is something else. But it all kind of flows together. Like, people today really want their kitchens and their dining rooms to really kind of be one gathering space. So there are ways to attain that effect, but still work within the standards and maintain the integrity of a property. And this is on the other side of that wall. And you'll see how they just cut through it and left some of the closet doors where they were. They really made sense for what they were wanting to do, and everyone was really pleased with this project. And then on the outside, they changed one window on the side, and then on the back, they put in a sliding patio door, so it was more sort of connection between the kitchen and the outdoors. And this is a good example. You know, people are always trying to find creative ways of putting ductwork into a house that never had ductwork. And so this applicant utilized the existing laundry chute to bring that trunk up and then disperse the air behind that wall. And so he just fixed the door in place. And just standing in the corridor, which is more of a primary space or more an important public space than maybe the bedrooms or bathroom, when you're standing in that corridor, it really feels like it did back maybe when the building was built. But on the other side of the wall, you can make those changes. So with that, I'd like to keep it short and sweet, but also give you some examples of some other projects that are successful and kind of, reduce some of those misperceptions out there. And with that, I guess open up with questions. Yes?
It seems the most important thing is to get it on the historic record.
That's a requirement for the federal program and for the state. State also, you can do a local landmark, but that's the.
So how difficult is that?
We feel it really comes down to what the architectural integrity of the property is and what its significance is. And to answer those questions, you just got to call our office and talk to our National Register coordinator and sort of let us evaluate. Maybe it's already been evaluated and it's already been determined that it's eligible for National Register. But if it hasn't, you just let our office evaluate it and provide our input.
So if it were a house that has been converted at some time to a duplex, then and you live in half of it, that's income producing, right?
The other half that you're renting out would be income producing. The portion that you're living in would be your own private residence.
But it would qualify as an income producing property.
The portion that you're renting, that you're not personally living in, if you're renting out a portion, that's the portion that would qualify for the credit.
Under the federal?
Under the federal. The entire property would qualify for the state incentive, because the state incentive can be used for private residential, but also, income producing.
And in neither program you get money, you get credits.
That's right. There are no there's no upfront grant money available. It's really indirect incentives. Some of the larger projects that redevelop big warehouses or commercial buildings, the amount of credit that they're receiving based on their project size is large enough that then they can look into syndicating and getting that capital up front from a bank that's technically buying into the project. But if it's a smaller project, probably less than, I'd say about $700,000, $800,000, you're really, if you're going to go for the federal program, you're going to have to utilize that credit yourself or as an LLC with other your own friends and family.
And then can you re-explain the state program?
Sure.
What do you get out of it?
It freezes your property tax assessment, the current assessment.
Before or after the improvement?
So the level that, let's say your house is worth $100,000 before you begin a project, and then you do your project, and our office approves it, sends our approval letter to the county assessor, then starting the next assessment year after your project's complete, it's frozen at that pre-project level. So it might go up. It might go up while you're doing the project, but eventually when you're completed with your project, it's going to transition back to what it was before.
So if what you do raises the assessment to $150,000,
Right.
it's still at 100,000.
Still at 100. There's
For
always
8
kind of
years.
there's always kind of a gap, depending upon where you hit it, that it might take another year for it to take effect because of the assessor's sort of rules and their procedures. But the general idea or take home from that is, yeah, it will revert back to the 100,000, even though it maybe is valued at 150, and it will stay at 100,000 for 8 years, and then it will step up 25% of the previous year for a period of 4 years.
After the 8.
After the 8.
And you can sell, when you sell the property.
It's transferable. Right now, you couldn't sell if you're in the process of doing a project, you can't sell it and have someone else do the rest of the project for you. You have to do the complete project. But after it's been approved from our office, then it's transferable.
And can part of the project be making structural corrections?
Absolutely.
Like a sagging basement or something?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no reason doing the fun and pretty stuff if you can't fix up the stuff that no one sees, right? So yeah, structural, electrical, plumbing, all of that infrastructure that's necessary for a property to be habitable and useful is definitely, those all are qualified expenditures. As long as they're within or attached to the house for the federal, or to the building. So as long as those improvements are attached or within the building for the federal tax credit, then they're qualified. If they're outside of the property and there's some sort of drainage, then it's a site improvement, it doesn't qualify.
What about water, sewer, and gas into a building?
What's that again, sorry?
What about, water, sewer, and gas?
There's some gray area in there. I know that there's been some questions with the IRS, whether like a geothermal, like you drill the well, if that, and then connecting it to your building, if that would qualify. And last time I checked with the IRS contact, she was of the mind that it does, because it's part of the structure, it's part of the infrastructure of your building. So there is definitely gray area, and those are, when you're trying to figure that stuff out, there's a person at the IRS to talk to, and you can just ask her, plainly, will this qualify? What do you think?
So who do you contact as the first step to decide if you can even get your house on these funny lists?
You would call the funny people at our office.
That's not you.
That's not me. So there's another individual at our office. Her name is Jessie Nunn, and she administers the National Register program. And so you would just call our main number and ask to be transferred to Jessie Nunn, and she will help you.
How difficult is that to get it on one of those?
I think it depends. I mean, I can't really answer that question unless I know what your property looks like. I mean, we're open, we consider everything, and we go out and look at everything. So it's, sometimes it's a slam dunk. We go there, we're like, oh yeah, it's obviously historic. We can think of the statement of significance in our head, and we can see it has great architectural integrity. So yeah, it's obvious. But sometimes it's not so obvious, and we have to, kind of wade through the arguments.
Is there any age guideline? Or?
50 years of age or older. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, if it's 50 years of age or older, that's the kind of cutoff. Then we have to assess significance and integrity. So now we're looking at 1961, which we've listed buildings of that age already. Certainly, we're already in the mid-century and we're loving it. So, but anytime before that would be, yeah. Yes.
Can you talk about the two houses at Field Club and Dundee, if they were already on the register, and if not, if you helped them get those houses placed on the register, and what it was about them that qualified them for it?
Yeah, both of them. This house is in the Dundee Happy Hollow Historic District, and it's a massive historic district. It probably is a little bit bigger than Boulevard's in Lincoln, the sort of Country Club Boulevard's historic district, but of comparable size. And the Field Club Historic District is also listed. That was done probably around early 2000s, and I think Dundee a little bit more contemporary, I believe.
Does it help to be across the street from a historic district?
No. But and I don't have any examples in my PowerPoint, but we do, our office's National Register Coordinator and I talk a lot, and we'll get inquiries that are generated, I want to list my property in the National Register, but the main sort of impetus for that is to do the incentives, and that's some of it. So and that applies to not only larger projects, but just there's a property owner in Fremont that just wants to list her house, and maybe she might do the incentives, and so we work with them to make that happen if we can.
But these qualified because they were already in.
They were
those
already in a
neighborhoods.
district, right? And so like for the federal program, you have 30 months after your project's completed to list the property in the National Register, and even then you can ask for an extension from the IRS. For the state program, right now, our understanding is that the property has to be listed or locally landmarked before those expenditures start qualifying. So it is a little bit harder with we have more flexibility with the federal incentive if something's not listed, but with the state incentive right now, our understanding is, yeah, it really needs to be listed before those expenditures start qualifying.
I have a building in a small town, commercial building, that's in one of these tax incentive, what do they call them, TIF zones.
Okay.
It's blighted.
You have blighted in some standard area,
Yeah,
sure.
How does that affect the tax
That's a
incentive? Because the whole deal there is that the town recoups the taxes from the.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I wouldn't know too much about that. I mean, certainly projects have occurred within areas that have been blighted and substandard. But if there's an agreement between the property owners of a certain area and the municipality to generate TIF, that's another thing. So maybe like Havelock, I know that's a TIF area, and they get facade money for facade improvements because of the TIF or the generate. I don't know if they could really do VIP and do TIF within Havelock because of that. I just haven't come up against that yet.
Okay.
Could certainly try to figure it out.
We should, for sure, I'll be in touch with you. This is in a little village of Weimar.
Yeah, it's just never come up before. I just haven't
That's
had that.
interesting.
So,
I'm amazed.
well, it'll be a learning experience for both of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Grant, isn't there a federal tax credit for anything that's built before 1936?
Absolutely. That's something I don't get into because it doesn't involve me.
36.
So,
What date?
1936. So I talked about the 20% federal historic tax credit. There's a tax credit that's in the same regulations as the 20%. It's the 10% rehabilitation tax credit, and any property that was placed into service prior to 1936 can utilize that credit. With the provided
20%?
no, provided that the property is not currently a certified historic structure, meaning that if your property is already listed in the National Register as one of those three ways I talked about before, then you can't do the 10%, you can only do the 20%. But if your property is not a certified historic structure, even though our office may say it's eligible for listing in the National Register, you could utilize the 10%. So you just kind of have to,
Age?
what's that?
Just from age?
Just because.
Because I imagine when they were writing the regulations and for the program, they're of the sound mind to realize, okay, not every property owner is going to have a property that is eligible for the National Register, but you don't want to limit certain property owners outside from getting a credit. So if it's not a certified historic structure, then you get the 10%. If it is, you get the 20%.
So a 1904 building would be eligible for the 10%?
Yes. If it's not currently a certified historic structure.
Now, that's a 10% tax credit on the improvement.
Same thing as the 20%.
Same as
It just, the only difference is our office, I don't get involved with that. That's just purely a transaction between you and the IRS. You have to keep your paperwork. I guess the only exception to that is, let's say your property, let's say someone has a commercial building within a National Register Historic District, but our office feels, and it's said in the documentation, that property does not contribute to the significance of that historic district. Then you would need to submit what's called Part 1 of the federal application to our office, and it's forwarded to the Park Service, and then they have to review it and either concur or disagree. And if they concur with you, then you can go along your merry way with the 10%. But if they disagree, then either you do 20% or nothing. So if you're within a historic district, you still have to kind of go through part of the process.
Yeah, well, this is not a historic district, but it's got a Mesker iron front.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
There's some folks in Illinois that were really excited about Mesker.
Oh, yeah, they're
Yeah.
all over the country.
Yeah, they had
The first floor has been ruined, but the second floor is extremely high.
Yeah.
And
Well,
just beautiful.
you can, just contact us and kind of weigh your options. I mean, maybe
I
you're going to
do that.
maybe it makes more sense with the 20%. Maybe it makes more sense with the 10. It's like kind of up to
Yeah,
you.
I have the complete history because for many years it was in my family back in the 19-teens.
Yeah, call us. That would be great. Lori. sorry.
Well, continuing on that question, if I have a barn sitting out in the middle of Colfax County, let's say, and it's huge and it's stored tons and tons of hay for years, built in the early part of the 20th century. I can't afford to bring it back to its historical original condition, but I do need to use that barn for my livelihood.
Sure.
Can I go ahead and put metal siding on it and still be eligible for this 10% federal tax credit?
Absolutely. With that 10%, there's no conversation with our office or the Park Service. So it's strictly a conversation between the property owner and the IRS. There's no design requirements or anything. There's a wall retention requirement. There's like 3 levels of wall retention. But other
And
than
how long do I have to capture that credit from when I start my project to when I have the money to finish my project?
ask that again.
Let's say that I can only afford to do it in part. I can't get it all done in 1 year.
Okay.
So when I will be eligible for that 10% federal tax credit on the improvement of my property will not take place until I'm finally completed with that
You
project?
have you
Or
will
how
have
would I
two
capture that?
years. You have 2 years to meet the adjusted basis of the property.
Okay.
So whatever that doesn't necessarily correlate. It's not the same as the actual project time frame, but within 2 years you have to have expenditures that meet or exceed the adjusted basis of that property.
And the improvement she does have to be 25% of the assessed valuation of the building.
See, this is where I always try to avoid it. This is where it gets confused because so we're talking about the federal tax credits,
Yeah.
the state incentive. You have to have qualified rehabilitation expenditures that meet or exceed 25% of the property's current assessed value.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, but for the federal,
For the federal, you have to have qualified rehabilitation expenditures that exceed the adjusted basis of the property or $5,000, whichever is greater. Because some properties, let's say someone bought it back in the 50s and it's depreciated and their adjusted basis is less than 5,000.
so when I painted my 1904 house, I could have got that because it was over $5,000 by quite a bit.
If you're able to do that, meet your adjusted basis or 5,000, yeah, you could have done that.
Just because of the age of the house.
Right. And the house has to be used for income producing purposes.
Half of it is.
Okay. So you can only take the credit. You could only take the credit on the portion that's being used for or that's producing income.
Well, that's
And-
half the house.
Right. And so I don't know when you paint stuff how you figure that out. That's beyond me. But
Well, you paint half the house.
all right.
Painting half the house was still more than 5,000.
That's. I'm not an accountant. I don't know. But yeah, it's possible.
But it's the adjusted basis or $5,000, whichever is greater.
What?
It's the adjusted basis or $5,000, whichever is greater. And probably the value of your house is more than $5,000.
Yeah.
So you would have to spend the actual assessed value, in other words, double.
For the federal, you
Cost of the
have to spend the adjusted basis, which is not the assessed value. Assessed value is the state program. Adjusted basis is the federal.
Or $5,000.
Whichever is
Whichever
greater.
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 Which often, like for a barn, that $5,000 is going to be your amount. The barn's probably going to be worth less. Depending. Those farms are in families for generations. So, or a sod house. Those things. How do you put a value on that? But, sorry. The guy in the green shirt that I don't know his name.
Oh, I'm Matt.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Can you elaborate on why the federal government has that income producing clause? Is it to ensure that there's taxable income coming from the property that they'll then get back? Or, why do they put that stipulation on it? Because, a lot of times we see somebody is rehabbing a commercial building into residential units, and so they have to keep them as apartments for 5 years until, the eligibility's up, and then they immediately convert to condos. I'm just wondering why that's a stipulation.
It's beyond me. I just don't know why it was written the way that it was back in '76, and then it was amended in '86.
You're looking for logic in
So, I would say one thing though. There was a period. I saw this more in Omaha, but there was a period where everyone was developing for condos, and that market went down. And now everyone that's doing tax credits actually wants to do apartments, even though if their long-range plan is condo. So it does work for the situation that's around right now, because no one's doing condos. For the most part, it's really just a lot of apartment stuff with the idea that it's gonna be. So, but as far as your question, I'm not qualified to ask or to answer that. Yeah, I
I got
don't.
another one.
Okay, I'm gonna go to K first. Sorry.
Do churches and schools qualify? Then they wouldn't, would they?
If they're going to continue to be, if they're going to be a tax exempt entity, they still have to be used for income. And there are some projects that are, let's say, there's one in Omaha called the Notre Dame Convent Academy and School. So the sisters bring in a developer that is and sort of investors that are going to do the project. The sisters maintain a minority share of the ownership, but still have maintain the organizational structure and what's going on in the building. So there are relationships that are able to sort of develop legally to allow a developer to get the credits and the sisters or whoever the tax exempt entity to kind of go forward with their what their mission and goals are. But it is sort of convoluted and hard to do, but depending upon the project, sometimes it's worth doing because those credits are just sitting out there, and people find a way to do it. So,
But a regular church would not be income producing, would it?
not unless you convert it to something. Sometimes we'll see churches that are houses now, and maybe if let's say it was a situation where someone buys an old church and converts it to rental housing, like a single family sort of house, and they rent it out.
But a congregation with a historic church that's falling apart can't.
Really,
Sell the
no.
house
Yeah.
and the church and rent it back.
Just
That
charge,
is income
just charge for the
producing.
service.
Church admission.
Do I have to rehab the entire building? I really don't want to do the second story yet.
No, you only do what you're comfortable doing.
Okay.
But as long as the work that you're doing meets your financial requirement, that's the threshold. And then, our office and the Park Service only reviews the work that you do.
Okay.
So you're not required to do anything.
Okay, so the residential area upstairs can be left there.
You can just leave it alone, mothball it, leave it alone. And that's actually better. And then you can just do the part that you're gonna do, and then maybe, later on, you wanna do another tax credit project.
That was my next question. You can actually do a second tax credit.
You can
project
rehab a
in the
rehab,
same
yes.
building.
But you just have to, your adjusted basis for the next round is gonna have to include all of the improvements that you've made. So depending upon that, I don't know how that works, but there've been a number of sort of tax credit projects that are rehabbing old tax credit projects. Like the Omaha building or Kutek Rock in Omaha was a tax credit project in '78 or '79, and they finished another one in like 2006. The Brandeis department store building was a tax credit project in like '83, '84, and they just finished this year, actually like 3 or 4 weeks ago. And there's a handful of others, so it does happen. Yes. Questions? No. Yes.
So if you were to rehab your whole house and do your whole house, that's the split like what Bob said, that's the two parts, and then you just take the expense of the new foundation and the expense of the paint, and then you just cut it in half, and that half gets applied for a tax credit?
I think in a sort of very, maybe theoretical way, that makes, I can give you just your basic answer, yes, but it's probably a little bit more trickier than that. I think you just have to make sure your expenditures all kind of parse out appropriately.
You'd have your contractor charge you 2 bills, just split it in half.
Well, but how do you, I mean,
Well-
if the second floor is rental, that's
Mhm.
the income producing, but the basement's going to hell. You know, if you don't have basement, the second floor is gonna collapse, so why couldn't you count the whole thing?
You can generate income in the basement.
Well, you couldn't generate income in the second floor, but
I mean, if you had a
the
commercial.
house collapses.
Yeah.
So we're still talking about a house, right? Wow,
Yeah.
we're getting into some deep questions here. I would think that, you know, depending upon the use, you could charge income, you can generate income from the basement. I mean, if you're, I don't, you know, we could talk later, because I think, off camera.
Okay.
All right.
How long does it take to list from the beginning when you come to you and say, I want to list my house on the National Register until your house is actually signed off?
How fast can you write?
You
How
gotta
long does
write
that
it.
take?
Right.
You gotta do your research and write it.
Absolutely. Well, as I say, just generally, I'd say a year, start to finish. And that, I mean, it can go faster depending upon how involved you are, or if you hire a consultant to write it for you. And it can take longer if you're just doing it in your spare time, like every month, you know. It's as fast as you can, but I don't know, I don't know. You say like no faster than like maybe 5 months. I mean, I don't know. Because we have, I should say, in order for a nomination to move on and be approved by the National Park Service, it has to go through one of our 3 board meetings. And so they meet in May, January, May, and September. So depending upon, you know, as you're writing, how fast you can get it and the timing of that to our board meeting, it could go faster or slower. I mean, that's part of it too. It is what it is, you know.
And there's a form to fill out?
Oh, absolutely.
So you could download the form and start filling out?
We would recommend that you just call us and that we kind of guide you through on how to do it and provide some pointers. I mean, some people are more adept at writing, and maybe you're one of them, and you'll require less help. But some people need more help. And there's definitely an organizational structure that the writing has to happen within the form, so that's important too. There's a lot of things to know. So you just have to ask for help. Don't worry about asking for help. It's the take home from that.
So if a person owns a home that's not in a historic district and their house isn't on the register, they go through this process of writing just to get on the register before they then do the state program with you.
That's
Right.
one way to do it. Although if you're in a city, like I said before, that's a certified local government that has a preservation ordinance, like Omaha or Lincoln or some of the others I mentioned, you could locally landmark your property. And that process, although might take maybe 3 months, depending, it happens a lot faster. You just have to go through the process of writing the nomination. First, talking to Ed Zimmer in Lincoln, if that's where you're thinking about, and writing the nomination for the local designation, and then having it go through city council readings and being signed by the mayor. So there's that process, but it's going to happen a lot faster than it would be for National Register.
And that can be in lieu of going on the Federal Register.
That's only for the state incentive. You can either,
But not for the federal.
not for the federal. Because it's a federal program, so they're going to require it to be listed on the Federal Register. Great questions. Kind of like trying to see if I know.
You know your stuff.
At some point I have to. So. All right. How are we?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.